So good evening, everyone, and welcome to you all to the Urban Colloquium Fall 2012 edition. The Urban Colloquium is a series of public conversations co-sponsored by two new graduate programs in urbanism. My name is Asim Inam. I'm the director of one of them, the MA Theories of Urban Practice here at Parsons. And the second new program is the MS Design and Urban Ecologies, also here at Parsons. And so I'm going to give you a short feel for what these programs are about through a short video clip, and then I'm going to introduce the speaker. Design is about physical form, it's about materials, it's about texture, it's about color, it's about space, but it's so much more than that, especially in cities. So here, the design is remarkable because it's very modest, it's very human scale, 6 stories tall, kind of what we would call medium density. It's designed around a courtyard where the public space is the heart of it. It's not just whatever is left over between the buildings. Now, the structure that decided and really made this project happen was the labor union, which looks out for working class people who have usually very little choice in terms of where they can afford to live, where they can afford to send their kids to school, where they can afford to shop. And this is not the kind of housing that gets on the cover of magazines, but this is the kind of housing that makes a city. First of all, what are the systems and structures that prevent really working class people and moderate income people who need housing to get the housing they need and deserve? And second, as this project shows, amalgamated dwellings, how do you design modest housing in very beautiful ways? And that's the kind of deep thinking and empowering knowledge that students will get. The other thing that our graduates will do is advocate for the public realm. The challenge is that the private realm, the private property, has many people who look out for it. Property owners, investors, neighborhood associations, lawyers. We need more people who know how to design the public realm, and we need urbanists who understand how that works. Of course, from a physical perspective, but also legally. How is public space controlled? What are the ordinances? What can you or cannot do? This is a fantastic example right now with Occupy Wall Street. Is that a public space? Is that a private space? It's actually very fuzzy. And a lot of designers don't understand it, but our students will, because they will dig deeper into it in a way that will actually have a real impact on the city and the people who live here. So one of the themes of these new programs, Theories of Urban Practice and Design and Urban Ecologies, is that we need new modes of practice, that conventional notions of urban design and conventional models of urban design practice are outdated and frankly impotent in terms of dealing with the complex realities and challenges of cities today. And this ties in with our fabulous guest speaker today, about modes of practice, for example, that she and her colleagues have been doing for many, many years, which are far more effective, far more in touch with the complicated realities on the ground. So our guest speaker today is Sheela Patel, who is the founder and director of the Society for the Promotion of Area Resource Centers, or SPARC, a nonprofit established in 1984 to address the problems of women pavement dwellers in Mumbai. Under her leadership, SPARC has catalyzed the construction of housing for over 8,500 families and over 500,000 toilets and latrines, with programs now in 70 cities in India. She is also the chair of Slum Dwellers International, an international network of poor people's organizations and the nonprofits that support them, which emerged from the Indian experience and now is active in several countries in Asia and Africa. She received the prestigious 2009 David Rockefeller Bridging Leadership Award from the Synergos Institute in New York And in 2011, she was the recipient of the Padma Shri Award, the highest civilian honor in India. Please welcome Sheela Patel.
Thank you, Asim, for inviting me today. I looked at all the names of all the people who preceded me, and I'm very privileged to be in their company. I probably represent the first person from the informal economy to come and speak at your sessions, and so thank you very much. What I hope to do today is to acquaint you with a very exciting and new set of social movements that are fighting for space in cities and seeking to do so in a way that will produce, in your language, new urban form. We don't know what it'll be, but it's something we hope that many of you will, in your future careers, participate in. I also will talk a little bit about the history and the evolution of the process that we're working in. And finally, I hope through the presentation I make and the discussions that we have, we seriously begin to think about what future cities hold for the whole world, and especially for the cities in the global south. So I start my presentation with something which Vanessa Watson from the Association of African Planners sent me, which is absolutely nightmarish in my account, which is a bunch of pictures that she has put together which represent the imageries of cities as presented by mainly northern planners and architects, being sold to mayors and senior politicians of countries in Asia and Africa about what their cities will look like. And if any of you have been to any of these cities, which I certainly hope you have, try and compare this imagery with the reality. Because what these images show you is the real battle that's going to be waged in our absolutely connected and globalized world on how urban space is going to be designed, managed, and in this instance, policed against the hordes of informal people who will be the major numbers of people who are going to come into cities in the global south. So whether it's the waste pickers of Cairo or the waste pickers of Mumbai or the slum dwellers in any of the city, the real contestation is going to be between the future productions of cities for 5% of their population versus making cities utilitarian, sustainable, robust, peaceful, any adjective you want to take, on who this city is going to serve. And I bring these pictures in mainly because my friends in Cairo, after the whole Tahrir Square, were very excited with what it would mean to have democracy. And the first thing that happened to them was they got screwed. And they had to fight and fight and fight for the rights of the waste pickers to contest for the tenders to manage the waste in Cairo. So it's very significant to acknowledge that a democratic form doesn't necessarily assume equity and inclusivity for all. And so the reality is that in general, the battle between the formal and the informal city has always been there from the very beginning. But today, its manifestation has become even more critical because legal norms, legal standards, things that make a city so-called function are exclusive and don't work for the informal city. And therefore you have, in many countries all over the world, large proportions of people living in informal shanty towns, or whatever word different cultures and different languages use for where slum dwellers live. And whatever their proximity to the formal city, it is as if that city is encompassed in a form of apartheid, which excludes and exploits, and is always in contestation with these glass towers and high-rise housing, which is everybody's imagery of what a city has to look like. So what you have is increasing encroachment of very small amount of physical space in the city, where smaller and smaller habitats house larger and larger numbers of people. And in this instance, this is a picture from Mumbai of pavement dwellers, some encroaching a bridge and some encroaching the place below that. So where is all this going to be after, we have these magical dates. You have 2015, after which you're going to have the post-MDG period. And then all the visions of the city are either 2020 or 2030. And so what is our imagery of where our cities are going to be? And how are neighborhoods going to be formed? Who are going to form them? What are going to be the rules that will guide this process? And basically, in almost all our cities, which traditionally had a market, a walled city in some places, or a traditional neighborhood, which are now all getting dismantled to produce the modern city. So you have a combination of culture, heritage, modernity, all battling with each other to look at who will survive. This is one of my favorite pictures. It's a town in Gujarat called Baroda. And this is the main street. And every single house there has grown incrementally over the last 150 years. And it represents really how most of our towns and cities evolved in the past, and which modern professional transformation wants to destroy and transform into medium and high-rise houses. This is what most of the streets in most of the cities in the global south look like. There'll be a few cars that are owned by 5 to 10% people that dominate the street, while a sea of people are around the pavements dodging these cars in marketplaces, most of which are illegal or informal. And all this is called chaos. So what is not chaos? We don't know, but this is chaos, and all of us are living in this chaos. For most of the people who live in informality, the constant sword on their heads is that of evictions and the demolition of their homes. So the people who are the most vulnerable, the people who are the poorest, face the ire of the state. So it's the opposite of what a nation state has to do to protect its weakest. And they are the ones whose homes are constantly demolished and whose life really represents the leaky bucket that we talk about, because the very assets that they produce are destroyed. And so it is with this basis in our mind that some of us set up Spark, which is a fairly small and modest NGO based in Mumbai, and which aligned with this very large, unruly, crazy group of community leaders, at that time mainly men, who networked to defend their communities against evictions, and who felt a deep distaste for formal development intervention, which often led NGOs to talk about hygiene and nutrition in a situation where people didn't have toilets, didn't have water to wash their hands, and didn't have food to eat. But they did workshops on all these things because that's what they were contracted to do. So over the last so many years, the Federation has a membership of around, we pretend to count, but it's around, it goes between 700,000 to 500,000 households in 9 states and 60, sometimes 65, sometimes 70 cities. Everybody asks us to count, so we count, but it's not an exact science. But the idea is to create a decentralized network of very large numbers of poor people who begin to feel that their collective knowledge of surviving is powerful and legitimate enough for them to participate in development activity. And the association between Spark and the NSDF produced a very unique and interesting organization called Mahila Milan, which is a network of women's collectives within the slums, which was a realization of these male, very chauvinistic leaders to acknowledge that the habitat agenda is essentially a women's agenda, and that women will spend decades, if necessary, to produce security of tenure, if not for their children, then for their grandchildren. And so the tenacity of our process depends upon the long-standing participation and mobilization of women. And then we have a small network of street children. All of you who come from the global south know that the city always has many young people who have run away from homes for various reasons. And so we've created this network to support them. And then we have a construction company. And there's a lot of this on our website. But essentially, the idea is to create a critical mass of very large numbers of poor people who begin to believe that they have a role and a contribution to make in the transformation and development of their city. And it's a very slow and rigorous process that's taken a lot of time. And our work began with pavement dwellers in Mumbai, as I told you, who are the poorest migrants in the city. And this building represents what we got after 20 years of convincing the national, the state, and the city government to have a policy and execute a strategy by which all these households got alternatives. And the nucleus of this, a group of 365 households, actually got land, built their own house, and designed everything themselves. And this is a picture of a very triumphant moment when the first building was built, and the housing minister of South Africa came to inaugurate it because our minister was too embarrassed to come and inaugurate 80 houses. And so we had a minister who came from South Africa. She came because later, as I'll tell you about Shack Dwellers International, she acknowledged the role that these community women played in building that international movement, and she came to honor that. So this is the whole really big celebration that we had in 2005 when the policy was put up and the process happened. So this is what SDI is. So Shack Dwellers International represents a global movement which focuses on producing local goods and services for communities. And so unlike a tradition of global processes which try and do global things and try and encourage local people to participate in it, we put it on its head and we say, no, this is a global movement which gets its legitimacy and its accountabilities to local communities. And so out of the Indian experience of the federation building, we came up with the realization that in a globalizing world, sometimes you have to go and argue and fight in Washington with the bank for some small thing that slum dwellers in a particular city need. So today, for instance, we're having discussions in Washington with the World Bank on the right of poor people in Nairobi to be allowed to apply for a tender to transform their own lives. But we believe that that is important, and we find that the legitimacy that we get is out of the sheer volume of people who participate in this, which means that however good your argument is, how strategic your thinking is, a critical mass of people seeking and aspiring for that change steadfastly are a very important catalytic expression for change. And as you see, our movement is mainly women. So within SDI and within our own work in India, our focus is as much for building capacity inside as it is building capacity of the government and institutional arrangements to relate to slum dwellers. I don't know how many of you have had direct interactions with slum dwellers or with municipalities. I can tell you both are very tough. Getting consensus, getting agreements, and getting a space where negotiation occurs is very hard. And we have a tradition where everything is top down. Everything is decided somewhere and is pushed on somebody else. And if it doesn't happen, then the poor are blamed because they're so bloody lazy. And so a very important part of our work is to make poor people believe that their survival experiences are very powerful. They produce new patterns, new strategies of how to bring change. And it's a very important conversation between professionals and communities to produce strategies that perform important functions that allow communities to get goods and services and for the city to transform itself. And so amongst the things that we do, we have a ritual called enumeration. It's nothing but community people doing a census of themselves. There is nothing more powerful in the world of urbanization than a sense of identity. And poor people are denied a sense of identity because the place where they live is not acknowledged as formal. So if you don't have an address, you don't have an identity. If you don't have an identity, you don't have entitlements. So this movement produces a self-identity. People count themselves, people give themselves identity, and they do a contestation publicly with the government, demonstrating that government doesn't know how to count poor people, it doesn't count them accurately, their information is not valid and up to date, and if they allow people to do it themselves, it produces governance structures and transparency as the state has never seen before. And so the first thing that we have, this motto in our movement says, when in doubt, count. And in many of the countries where we function, you have a situation in which our data is legitimized and made formal by the state. And very often, we are fighting with young professionals who are commissioned by consulting agencies and governments to do the surveys. And we just won't let them into our neighborhoods because we say poor people have to count themselves. The other thing we acknowledge, we've got the government to acknowledge is poor people tell you what you want. So when you go for your next survey, remember this. I'll give you a small story. We had a women's group and we were talking about health. And one woman said, all the women were saying, even if I go for a backache or a headache, the first thing the doctor asks me is, how many children do you have? And if I say I have 3 children, she starts telling me about sterilization. And she forgets that I came for something else. So the smartest thing to do is to tell her, I have 2 children and I already have a tubectomy. And then you can get the rest of your health problems solved. So poor people tell you what you want to hear. And very often, when people are interviewed in group for important things, people tell each other, don't tell these lies. You're not this age. You don't have so many children. Your child never went to school. And you get more authentic data. The other very important thing is what happens with this data. All of us, as professionals, we are like vacuum cleaners. We go there and we just suck information from everybody. And we say it's good for you. There'll be good research done, some good insight. But no individual living in informal settlements or in poverty has any evidence that the data that is collected works for them. And so a very important part of our work is to produce data that helps poor people agree to what their priorities are, agree to their systems, and agree to learn to negotiate using data that they have collected. And so this process takes many forms. And here you'll see communities being trained how to do informal plain table surveys, how to number their houses, how to do the data collection, how to go and do rechecking. And as a result today, in many parts of the world, communities are being commissioned by their municipalities to collect data. And as digital technology comes in, more and more of this data is digitalized. So what you have here in that colorful side is women drawing their own neighborhoods. And then on the other side, you have the scale maps that then people come and do. We find that by and large, communities, cities don't like to count all their informal neighborhoods. I don't know a single city that actually knows the location of every single informal settlement, where it is, who lives there, and what its deficiencies are. But every city has some favorite slums, which we call the queen of slums. In Mumbai, it is Dharavi. Every international student who comes to me says, can I please do my work in Dharavi? I said, 65% of Mumbai is slums. Why don't you throw a stone and pick some other slum? And they say, no, but I've done enough research. So what do you want to do? I want to talk about violence for girls between 15 and 18 in Dharavi. What's that got to do with the slum? But that's how, the more you know about one locality, the more it becomes the center of your attention and everything else gets ignored. So one of the things we do is we do that. The second thing we do is we believe that people in poor communities have to learn about trust. And the way we build that capacity is by setting up savings groups of poor women so they learn to manage money, They demonstrate what constitutes transparency, because there is no slum anywhere in the world where people haven't collected money from poor people and run away. So the idea is, how do you hold your treasurers accountable? And how do you use the money that you collect to become a local ATM that you can use for the smallest needs that you have? People's needs for emergency are not large amounts of money. They need small amounts of money immediately. And if the money is in their neighborhood, they get it. So this is a very important signature of the Federation. And it's a very interesting way to get women into the leadership process. My apologies, but men don't like to deal with small amounts of cash. So they're happy to give this work to the women. But what the women do is, through this process, they produce such a powerful system to help each other. It forms the basis on which we borrow externally and lend to them for various things. And by that time, the men have missed the bus. So another very important aspect of our work is to build a culture of negotiation and dialogue inside. You know, all subcultures adopt the culture of the mainstream, and we all operate in a very vertical, some leader decides something and everybody accepts it. And it's the same thing in slums. So how do you create discussion, debate, dialogue to produce an agreement on what to do? That's one of the first things that we do in STI. This is one of the first things that people learn to do internally. And that forms the basis of how they negotiate with their ministers. This is a picture we took in Rio some years ago at the World Urban Forum. It was one of the only informal places where 15 housing ministers sat with slum dwellers to discuss about urban partnerships with slum dwellers. Well, most of them are out of office, so we have to start all over again. This is the other part which we do, which is that poor people are always told that somebody else will give you a house, that it'll come like manna from heaven, and you just have to hope and pray. And what you have here are a bunch of people who have conceived of the kind of house, and what you have, this is a very interesting story. This is a funicular roofing tile, which reduces the cost of roofing to 25% as against RCC roofing. And so you'll find that the women designed it, and all the men jumped on top to see, and they were jumping on it to see that it was strong enough. But it's a very interesting example of things that we do. And through this, we try and change the norms and standards of construction so that incrementally upgrading homes, which poor people can afford, is done. In 2001, that design which you saw in the earlier picture, we put it up here in New York in the UN building. And everybody who looks at it, and of course it was a big hit because Kofi Annan came and went around there, and then all the delegations came and took their pictures in front of it. But in today's world, I mean, everybody at the UN says we'll never be able to do this again. Imagine 38 slum dwellers carrying wood and walking into the UN building and working day and night with nails. You know, we didn't have all those automatic, electric nail thingies. So we were banging at it. But it became such a thing that brought a whole lot of people within the UN administrative staff to work with us. But it also demonstrates in many ways how much the world has changed and how much the space for poor people to do things has contracted as a result of all our concerns about terrorism and other things. This is a picture of a city in Pune, and some of you may have heard that, you know, India had this very prestigious and first time ever a very major urban investment program called the Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewal Mission. And a part of it was slum upgrading. And for us, this is one of our precedents at scale where women from slums in Pune got the municipality to change its procurement and allowed them to contest for the right of residents' associations to build these houses, and broke every rule in the book and built the houses using the money that was there. And a lot of architects came and they were so upset. Oh, this space isn't big enough. Where are the motorable roads? Where's the light and the ventilation? And the women said, this is my home. Go away. But it was interesting, the processes that happened. Every single home was designed with that woman's involvement. Every single cluster saw how the restructuring would be done. And every single household had documentation that would ensure that they had the right to that house, as against a sort of an informal right to do that. And all this stuff was done by community people. And it's become a place of pilgrimage right now, because this particular scheme called the Basic Urban Services Program, which was a massive scheme for about 65 cities, ended up with not even serving 5% in its original program of housing stock in the 65 cities, and not even 20% of those houses were built. And I'll send to you the report that we've done if people are interested in it. But it brings to the fore the fact that very little money is allocated in terms of the volume of need. And this is not so only in India, but we've seen this in South Africa, we've seen this in Brazil, we've seen this in many countries, where with great difficulty money is put aside for this purpose. But because of the inability of the state to understand this process, the projects are designed badly. They are executed very opaquely, usually contracts given to the cousin of the engineer or some relative who takes half of the money away. And in most instances, people choose not to go and live in those houses. So it's a very serious loss of public resource allocated with great difficulty to address the issues of poverty. We also have this strange paradox. These are the main pipes that bring water to the city. And yet, till 15 years ago, the residents in these neighborhoods didn't get access to water until they made holes into these big pipes and put pumps and drew the water out. And there was a jaundice epidemic in the city, because these people also didn't have any sanitation. So you can think of all the things that went into those waters. So that has produced the basis on which now groups of people can apply for water supply. But what it tells you is that the water supply, which was available in abundance in that city, was not provided to everybody for the good of everybody. It was provided to poor people because there was an outcry of people living in formal places about the epidemic of jaundice. That was also the reason, by the way, that the city of Mumbai got its first sewage program, because there was plague, and all the cotton that was being exported in the 1800s was no longer accepted in the countries to which it was exported. So the sewer lines were brought into the city. There's a very interesting report of the collector in a gazette in the Asiatic Library about this. It seems that the ambassador from Egypt complained. So what you have is a situation in most of our cities that 70% of the city is not connected to the main sewage treatment. And then a large amount of cities in Asia and Africa have no sanitation. And so one of the things that we in India and SDI does is we produce what we call precedents. We design, like in this particular case, the top floor of this toilet is a community hall. And there's a tea shop at the back. And so all the people in the municipality and all the elite were absolutely shocked. How can you have a place where people can have a wedding on top of a toilet? Or how can you have a tea stall next to the toilet? And so the answer of my colleague was, don't you guys drink tea before you go to the toilet in the morning? Essentially, the strategy of the alliance is to build leadership at different levels, give them exposure, and you have all these women from different countries from Asia and Africa who today can come and sit here and speak to you about the things that they do or negotiate on behalf of a very large constituency, and whose advocacy is both powerful and rich in its experience. What I want to end with is some reflections on those of us who are involved in development to think about. And the first one is what I started off with, is in a world which is globalized, where power centers are located far away from the city or the country that you live in, what is the value of local advocacy? And what our movement has shown us is that people need to be organized from the local to the global, and that the accountability of the global has to be to the many locals. Otherwise, we are no different from all the institutions that operate in the Beltway in Washington or London or somewhere, where policy that is completely irrelevant gets promoted to our localities. The other big realization is that cities all over the world are now being ruled by construction businesses. It has now become the most important economic activity in cities that finances local politics. And if you look at Transparency International, it will tell you that between 5 to 23% of all construction contracts are more or less used to grease different institutional arrangements. And so that becomes a very important hurdle in trying to create inclusive and equitable cities, because funds from all over the world find that building high value, large buildings is so much more profitable than building houses for the middle class or the poor. So these are very important and critical challenges that are there. And the reality is that 90% of planners and architects are employed by these institutions. So for all your idealism, it'll all get rubbed off within 6 months in these arrangements where you have no voice, you have no choice, you have a fairly good salary, and you're told to shut up and do whatever you have to do. The third very important thing is that in development, we all become very idealistic. And that idealism means we want perfection. And when you work on issues of poor people, you can never get perfection. You get a lot of mess. So if you don't have the capacity to manage mess, and cities are a mess, cities are not clean, not in straight lines, standing and doing things in an orchestrated way. It's a lot of different people with different opinions. And so very often, even those who are intellectually committed to making cities equitable quickly get disillusioned when they face the mess for the first time. And we have this paradox where when countries misuse money, when cities mess up projects, we say, oh, there's no capacity. We must give them capacity. But when poor people mess up projects, they never get a second chance. And nobody's trained poor people to do these fantastic things or to make mistakes. And as one of my colleagues once said, that to be poor means never to have a second chance. You can't get up once you've fallen. And so a very important part of a change in the development paradigm is to acknowledge that a lot of mistakes are going to be made before something comes out. And poor people need a second chance more than anybody else. And so I want to end this presentation with an invitation to all of you. If you are from any southern country and you want to get acquainted with the people's movements there, write to us. Most of our federations are very happy to invite young people who informally will say, ask us a lot of rubbish questions. But they're indulgent, they are happy to give you an exposure and talk to you. So do come and see them. If any of you want to intern in these institutions in different countries, meet them. But give yourself an opportunity to explore the informality in whichever city you are, because that is the future of cities. 80% of most southern country cities are going to be informal. They're going to have migrants who have no skills, no assets, who come into the city for various reasons, push, pull, whatever theory you want to put, but they are there. And the ability of all of us as professional people to demand of our governments to produce inclusivity and to be accountable to poor people, I think is the only way in which our own lives will be safe. Because otherwise, we will be back in the Wild West where guns and knives will not protect us from gated communities. So thank you.
My first question for you is, you talked a lot about developing identity and the right to the city and right to development. Can you talk a little bit more about how you cultivate that in your work?
Well, the first important thing is to recognize the manner in which people produce their own identity. So if you go to most neighborhoods, you may see a sea of huts. But if you go and do demarcations, you'll find there are neighborhoods that have clean geographical boundaries. There are neighborhood leaders. You have neighborhood names to different places. And so we start off by building on that identity and then examining the aspects of their self-regulation to work at what's good and what's bad. Because not everything that is local and cultural is good. In most of our societies, there are very stringent rules against women, for instance, and what they cannot do. So a very important part of our work is to develop a culture of agreeing to things that support a identity. And then we've done these things in the past where everybody in a neighborhood has given numbers to their huts and then sent postcards to themselves. And in most of our cultures, if you have a postcard sent to you on an address, it's treated as identity. So the part of it is also to look at ways by which we do that. We've also used past, in many countries, you have things which are called like if you've been there before 1995, you're entitled to this or that. So we've used eviction notices before 1995 as a form of identity for the slum, saying, you gave it to us. So part of it is to be inventive, to look at what you can use for your identity. And increasingly now, more and more countries are beginning to formalize these identities. And an important part is to look at ways by which people can appropriate mechanisms through which that identity is produced. Yeah, I'm sure you...
Thank you. Thank you. I have lots of questions, but I'm going to do just one. My name is Maria. I come from Colombia. I think there's a lot of like politics in your talk, and it's inevitably it's you have a political agenda, whether that's the instrument or the aim, I don't know, but it puzzles me, the relationship between these institutions you tell us about and the state, and it seems that they grow because of a failed state void in this respect. But as they go stronger, these institutions, they will fill in places that should be states' place, roles.
Filled by formal political processes.
So how do you picture this future? Because you're growing an enormous critical mass of organized people. You have a tremendously sophisticated transnational and local structure, and your success, it's a threat for the state. And what does that really mean? No, because
yeah, okay, big question. As a middle-class professional who was mainly involved in welfare, my own politicization came out of the fact that however efficient my organization's welfare activities were before I founded Spark, it had nothing to do to protect communities from eviction, which came out of a political decision of the city. And if you examine the nature of a lot of non-profit organizations, they are embedded in providing services. And the nature of organizations that provide services is very different from organizations that do other things. So in our own analysis, what we realized is that in many ways, and I'm now talking mainly of Asia and Africa, where the urbanization is still at very low levels compared to Latin America. And studying what happened in the Latin American process in the 60s, 70s has been a very important education for us. The only difference was that a lot of that mobilization was around fighting dictatorships. Be that as it may, what we realized in Asia and Africa, in Asia especially, our rural parts of the country are extremely feudal. So there's a big part of our country which is in the 17th and 18th century. And where you had the feudal lord that owned you. And if you didn't listen to him or his family or his thing, they not only sexually exploited people in your family, but they also physically and in labor ways, they exploited you. And if you protested, you were killed or you were destroyed. Now, if you look at the urban form of this feudalism, the local politician is the new feudal lord who uses you as a vote bank. And vote banks are not only in India, they're all over the world. You have insecure populations of people who are held in this strange paradox, which is supposedly democratic because they vote, but who get no benefits from the leader that they elect. He or she gets an opportunity to make money, to exploit them, and if they don't listen, in every single case of demolitions that we have dealt with, it's been because the communities have chosen more recently to align with the federations. So it's a reprisal. And it's a strange thing because the federations are training communities to demand accountability from the municipality, to which they have elected their local politician, and he's so threatened by it that he provokes the eviction and then comes out to defend them. That's the story. So these are the kinds of things that we have to deal with. And the manner in which we do this is to say that this is politics with the small p. The politics with the big P is the party political process. And the idea is that if you create an educational process that transforms the way people think, their aspirations are changed, they will hold whoever they vote accountable in a different way. That's what we hope. We don't know. Does that answer your question? No. But in some countries, I'll give you an example. If you look at the concept of community organizing, it's always like somebody from the outside goes and tells everybody that you should be organized and this is good for you. And then when the project is over, then everybody leaves and then people go. This form tries to keep people aware of the politics of what's happening in their city and what's happening in their countries, and to begin to test whatever they feel comfortable with. Because change is traumatic for poor people, you know. If you've lived in a survival situation, even a change of alliance from the politician to the federation is a very big leap of faith. And so it's a very gradual process. It's not something that happens very quickly. And so a lot of people say, why don't you get 5 of these people and get them elected into, into the local politics? What happens is they learn how to do structured corruption very quickly. Because that's what happens in most of our municipalities. So it's a very slow and gradual process.
Thank you. In your work, did you come across a situation where once you organized the people, the city or the municipality was very welcoming of that and then was more willing to give them services and other things, because now they had an organized group, so it was very easy for them to administer whatever they were supposed to administer, water supply or health services or insurance or something?
Well, we have a constant love-hate relationship with everybody. We are much loved when we are able to help them do the delivery of things that they want. And then we get hated by people whose opportunities we steal. So when communities do their own construction, we have robbed somebody of a very important form of fundraising for themselves. So there's that dichotomy in everything that we do. In most instances, when documentation of surveys is done, the whole production of identity is a very important thing in cities or in any governance structure. And most of the communities that we have spoken to in different countries find that the municipal people charge them for doing their documentation. It's a form of corruption in another way. So that's what I'm saying, that you might have some people who like what you do and some people who don't. So you're familiar with what we are doing in Dharavi. Lot of people from all parties are very upset with us because they've lost the opportunity of making millions and millions of rupees on the basis of the fact that we've cancelled their contracts. So it's not one or the other, it's both. So we get slapped from one side and we get patted on the other.
So what are the biggest success stories where this has worked?
Well, several. I'll give you one in India and one maybe in Uganda. In India, in Bombay, about 85% of people use public transport, and our trains, just like you have your suburban network, we have a train structure in which people need to go jump on the roof and hang by the door in order to get it, but that's the only affordable transport for most of it. And for 14 years, up to 2005, the municipality, the state government of Maharashtra and the railways were negotiating with the World Bank for a loan to upgrade this. And the bank demanded, the bank demanded that all the households that would be affected by the upgrading of this needed to be rehoused and rehabilitated. And there was no such precedent over there. And it just so happened that all the households who lived along the railway track were part of our federation and had been negotiating with the railways long before we knew about this project to do something to give them amenities and services or to allow them to get housing. And you can have Bob tell you all the details of this story because he was involved in it. And basically, based on the work that we'd done with Pavement Dwellers and others, we provided the entire architecture of the relocation strategy and got a commitment from the government that communities will do the survey. We had to fight the bank staff and all that to do that, but people designed and executed the entire relocation, which is, I think, probably the first time anywhere in the world. So that was a spectacular thing which was interesting internationally because there's no railway in the global south which is not encroached. And so wherever there are communities encroaching there, SDI will invite them and their railways and their government to come to Bombay and meet everybody. Not only us, but also the railway people to look at how can this arbitration and negotiation be done. And so another very interesting breakthrough has been in Uganda, where both the development, bilateral and multilateral development actors who wanted to make investments in Uganda agreed to our model in which in 6 cities, communities formed federations, mapped all the informal settlements, and began to build capacity to do small upgrading projects, and will now be the basis on which they will put in infrastructure, and all the smaller works will be done by communities, which is like a mainstream adoption of our strategies. So there are many more things like this, but we find that all these things are decadal. Nothing happens in 1 or 2 years. So if any of you get into doing evaluations, remember I said that you can't evaluate a project for 3 years. You have to look at it decadally, because in urban areas, nothing happens quickly.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
The 2 hands at the back.
Hello. My name is Jessica. I'm from Colombia. I wanted to ask, how do you approach the communities? You're in 33 countries. I want to know how is the process of the approach to the community, and how do you do it without being so intrusive, or without challenging their identity or their way they're organized?
I think in several ways. First of all, SDI doesn't go with a torchlight to look for countries. Usually, you find that in many cities and in many countries all over the world, there are small initiatives struggling to explore this. And through some approach or the other, they get to know about us, they write to us. And usually somebody from the neighboring country who's associated with STI will go and visit them and check them out. And if they're it's all to do with persistence, you know. If you say, no, I want to come and see what you do, but I don't have any money, then SDI will scratch somewhere and get some money for them to come and look at what's happening. And then based on that, there'll be a group of slum dwellers from one of the nearby affiliates who'll go and talk to these people about what they do, how they do things. So it's a very much of a peer exchange. So all these people that you see are from 15 countries. And so it's not you or me who will go there to talk to slum dwellers. There'll be a bunch of community leaders from slums who either speak that language or are comfortable doing it through a translator who'll go and speak to them and share the strategies and the ideas that they have and ask them to explore doing that. And we encourage a process in which some professionals assist them to manage this thing, because when you're doing surveys, supposing you survey 15,000 households, you better have somebody who sits and aggregates that data, otherwise it's useless. So we look at ways by which this can be supported and assisted. But where the relationship between the slum dwellers and the professionals is as much as possible one of peers, and not a bunch of professionals telling communities what to do. And now there's a culture of doing that. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. And yet there's a larger network of people who are there to support and assist that environment. But it's a slow and incrementally growing thing. So a lot of people ask us, so now you have 33 countries now. When are you going to hit the magical number of 100? And we say, we don't know. The number doesn't matter. It's the quality and the value that comes to those who are part of it.
One last
Good evening. I'm Mohamed Ka. I'm from Senegal, West Africa. I just have one question. I know that in the developing world, we have a tendency to witness an exclusion of the poorest of the poor. And I would like to know, in your organization, if you have a unit or a component in your organization that makes sure that resources goes to the poorest of the poor, that there is no exclusion of the most vulnerable. In India, for instance, we know that we have a lot of differences as far as ethnicity is concerned. I can think of the Dalit and the untouchable. So how your organization think and take care of those group of people, and also if your organization have a gender orientation in implementing your programs. Thanks.
Very nice question. In the fundamental fabric of our organization, whenever we are exploring solutions, we try to produce solutions that the bottom 30% in any informal neighborhood can do. So we never operate, in development you have this thing of go for the low-hanging fruit, get success, and then you'll get more success. We believe the other way around. We say that no development trickles down. Instead, you design solutions for the bottom 30%, and it's very easy to adapt these for the better off, not the other way around. That's one. The second thing, as I explained in my group, 90% of the membership that is active within our federations are women. It is a culture that is built around women's participation, and its uniqueness lies in the fact that it is not men against women. Most of the older and senior leaders of NSDF are men who have gone out of their way to facilitate and support negotiations in localities that allow women to explore and take these things out. And towards your last question, 95% of people who live in slums are from different minorities, and if they're Hindus, they're Dalits. So it's a very interesting formulation of also producing the much needed secular form, because in many of our countries you will have some benefits that go only to Dalits. You'll have in India we have, if you're a minority, you're a Muslim or you're a Buddhist, you get something. If you're a Dalit, you get something. And our federation says, no, these are all people below this particular line of poverty. They will all get these benefits together. And we also try very hard to ensure that solutions are collective. And for me, the most important thing I've learned, and which humbles me more than anything else, is you go to any community of the poor and you sit and ask them, show me the people who are the worst off. It won't take them 2 minutes to find those people. And if you go and talk to most of them, they'll say that their neighbors feed them the day their kitchen doesn't operate. And somehow modern development practice makes the better off in slums compete with the poorest when the state gives resources. So a lot of our own work is to create conditions by which the leaders support and assist those who are most vulnerable to get access to the welfare benefits and get them involved in doing that. I mean, that's a very important part of what produces validation for leadership. But since you've come from Senegal, I'll tell you, one of our big challenges in Africa is to reach Francophone Africa. We're trying very hard to do that. And we're trying to find young Portuguese and French-speaking people. So any of you who want to volunteer to assist us, please come.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.